הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stewart Ain. Every week we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today I'm glad to welcome back Gerald Steinberg. So remember, he is the president of NGO Monitor, and he's Emeritus Professor of Political Science at Bar-Ilan University. Welcome, great to see you again.
It's great to see you as well. It's been a long time.
Right, so NGO Monitor, you're monitoring all these non-governmental groups that come in and say, oh, we're going to help the Palestinians with different aids. And one of the big ones, United Nations group, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, they've been working with Palestinians for decades, and turns out that they really haven't been on the up and up, have they? You guys have been saying about that too. You've been warning, as I recall.
I'll make a few academic comments and get into then I'll start answering your question, right? I got to do something.
Sure, please.
But
sure.
We're in a completely different world, a different phase after October 7th. Now, UNRWA, United Nations Relief Works Agency for Palestinians, as they changed their name, they added for Palestinians back a few years ago. They've been around since 1949. And they're actually not an NGO per se. They're a UN body. They're paid by the governments, and NGOs are not, at least in theory, non-governmental, but they all work very closely together. So when we look at what UNRWA has been doing, and these are not things that we didn't know for people who are paying attention, but nobody in governments wanted to know about this. The United Nations dismissed it. A friend of mine, a colleague, Hillel Neuer, who runs UN Watch, has been monitoring specifically UNRWA for many years, and has been showing the evidence of what's being taught in the schools, what they're doing, what the teachers are writing on Facebook about hating Israel, hating Jews, the anti-Semitism, the support for terrorism. That we knew for a number of years. You know, in 1961, I'm doing some back research, the US Congress added an amendment to the Appropriations and Allocations Bill specifically for UNRWA. We're talking 1961. Right, so we're going back many, many years, because they started back in 1949, and they said that we will not support. We said no U.S. government funding will be made available to UNRWA. I'm going to change that. U.S. government funding will be made available to UNRWA only under the condition that no money go to what they called in those days an armed member of the Palestine Liberation Army. It was before the PLO. It was a precursor to the PLO. It was before Arafat even, the Palestine Liberation Army, and no money will go to anybody involved in terrorism. It was very specific. Then you jump ahead another 40-something years. I think it was 2003. And then again, it was a GAO report, a government accounting office. They said that, well, there have been some difficulties applying this regulation, and we have to overcome those obstacles. So we're talking about now going back about 60 years, going back about 25 years, 23 years, and it's been going on through this. What's happened after October 7th, the evidence has become so blatant that it's inescapable. And I have to say that there was a lot of criticism in Israel of the Biden administration and the Democratic Congress. But on this issue, Biden showed leadership, and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State. The United States was the first to say we're freezing funding, and then all the other countries followed. And while some of them are backsliding, the U.S. is maintaining that limitation. So that, I think that shows some backbone on this issue.
But you have Sweden and Canada resuming $20 million from Sweden
and the European Union. Yeah, that the first one back was the European Union, and it's all about what's called virtue signaling. There's a lot of pressure on all these political leaders, especially if you've got Arab constituencies or Muslim constituencies, but also from the progressive wings of their parties, to say, we're helping the Palestinians. Yeah, we have sympathy for the Israelis. terrible thing that happened. But Palestinians, we see it on television every day. They're all suffering. They're all being starved. We got to help these people. And the easiest thing to do is to write a check for UNRWA
Throw
and
money
say,
at
well,
it.
we're not going to pay attention to the fine print. And that's, but so Canada, yeah, European Union, a couple of other countries have gone back. But again, up until now, we're talking here on, what is it, Thursday, the U.S. government has not, they were not the first, they haven't gone back yet. And that's, there's tremendous pressure from within the Democratic Party, from the progressive wing, as they say, and from other countries to do it. They haven't done it.
And Sweden is saying we're going to have an independent audit, and we're going to strengthen internal supervision and staff checks. But as they said, UNRWA said, well, we didn't know that they were underground and tapping into our electrical. We didn't know. We didn't hear them digging underground to set up their offices right underneath us.
You know, we track, it's not just UNRWA, but we track something like 250 different non-governmental organizations, Save the Children, Oxfam, all those groups. And they had people in and out of Gaza continuously. Hamas took over Gaza officially in 2007. It was a military coup against, can you imagine? This is something that most people don't understand. One terrorist group has a coup against another terrorist group. That's the politics of the Middle East, and particularly Palestinian politics. So they threw people off of buildings. They threw other Palestinians off of buildings.
Yes, sure.
So
when they took over, yeah.
From 2007, right?
Yes.
So we're talking about 17 years roughly. Hamas has been running the show. And yeah, the drilling underneath, all that stuff. It sort of reminds me of the story of Sdom, right? There are some honest people there. So you have at least a handful, I'd say at least a dozen actually. It's more than a handful in most places, of NGO people who came out and said, you know, everybody knows what's going on there. There were some doctors that came out and said it. There were some journalists. There was a Dutch journalist, Jan Frank, who wrote about this and was ostracized and told, warned, threatened. As I said, there were enough reports of that. And of course, at each stage, everybody else says, oh, no, that's not, we don't know. I'll tell you a quick story since we're doing this in my own experience. There's a very powerful NGO called World Vision.
Yes.
And they have a budget of close to $3 billion a year. And they had an operation, a small operation in Gaza and the West Bank, on the order of $10 to $12 million a year, mostly funded by the government of Australia. In 2016, the Israeli police arrested the head of their Gaza program, Palestinian, and all these groups hire mostly Palestinians to run their programs. He was arrested. He was charged with funneling off all that money, must have been more than 50 million, because it wasn't all the money that they funneled off to Hamas.
Yasser Matarja.
Sorry?
I think his name is Yasser Matarja. Is that how you pronounce it?
No, that's somebody else. That's the Norwegian Refugee Council.
Oh, sorry.
I'll tell you that this is World Vision. Yeah, there are a lot of these things. So it's not like nobody knew. They just didn't want to know. So in World Vision, guy was arrested. He was the indictment was very specific on which areas of there was money that was supposed to go to Palestinian fishermen that went to the underwater terror part of Hamas, and this base and that base. Very specific. They obviously had very clear intelligence information. And right afterwards, World Vision, right after he was arrested, World Vision sent over 2 high-level people from Australia. One was the person who oversees all of their Middle East operations. And the other one was an Australian who was part of the organization as more of a board member, an overseer, not someone who was involved, not a paid person. And we sat and we talked. It was at the American Colony Hotel. They picked it out, and on that side of Jerusalem. I don't call it.
Yes,
but
I know.
And so we're sitting there and talking about it because we had written. NGO Monitor has a file, and it's on our website. Everything we do is on our website. You can just click on and look it up. And we had a file of material that predated the arrest, that were things that were, I wouldn't use that term with them, not kosher, that were problematic. Later on, we also found they produced different versions of their financial status for different audiences with huge differences, which means that either they knew they were faking it, or people were writing, their auditors and financial people were playing around with the books, which could explain how easy it was to divert. But the bottom line was, they said, one of the women in particular who runs the Middle East, says, well, we come every few months and we go to Gaza and we talk to the people there, and we support agriculture, we talk to the people and the farmers. We see the fields, they're growing crops. And I said, do you ever ask them what's going on underground? And everybody, they sit back and, no, we wouldn't, that's not our business, right? Or something like that. And then right there, that tells you everything you need to know.
Yes.
So it
With a
was
couple of blinders. Yeah.
Their argument is, apart from the fact that they do produce quite a bit of anti-Israel propaganda, that goes the other example, Mortaja, you raised with the Norwegian Refugee Council, another very, this huge amounts. This is an industry, and there's no oversight. Okay, in most countries there is oversight in the sense of they're filing the IRS forms where they list specific aspects, how much money they take in, how much money they spend, what their salaries are for the top people, that they file. But what they actually do with the money, there's no oversight. No, that's why I ended up spending 20 years of my life doing NGO Monitor, because I thought, this is a huge industry, somebody's got to do it. So there's no oversight, there's no due diligence. A lot of the money comes from governments, and it's about, let's get our picture taken showing we're doing good things for Palestinians. So the very clear elements, which we keep coming back to, you're giving money to Gaza, huge amounts of money. You know what UNRWA's budget was recently? $1.6 billion. Coming from governments. US is the biggest donor. Germany, the European Union, and then all the rest. You get to Sweden, Japan, everybody else. So there's no oversight, there's no supervision. All these NGOs that get equal amounts total, we're talking about $1 billion here, $1 billion, so we're talking about real money. Save the Children, Oxfam, all these, World Vision, all these different groups that have staffs and are operating in Gaza, and no idea where the money went. It's a terror-controlled entity. By the way, it's not just about Gaza. When these organizations operate in Sudan or in Africa, parts Central Africa, where they're operating in what really amounts to a terrorist-controlled entity, the truth is we've seen that they also don't pay attention to where the money goes. They also don't do the due diligence. It doesn't come with a huge package of propaganda, but it's part of their culture, their corporate culture, not to care or to ask, we're just here to help people. Well, you're not helping them by giving money to terrorists.
And 3,000 teachers in Gaza applauded the October 7th massacre.
Yeah, that was the Telegram group. Yeah, sorry, that information is out there. So I haven't been able to ask the people in the European Union, but I know that members of parliament there have asked. They don't. Why did we give the money back? It's taxpayer money without doing this. We got all this information, the 3,000 teachers in the Telegram group. We've got something like, I think it's at 15% of all Hamas employees, all UNRWA employees are officially part of Hamas. There's all sorts of other evidence. Aren't you going to look at the evidence and decide? No, we got to help the Palestinians now. They're suffering.
That's it. And now Israel has said it's going to review NGO visas. What they weren't before. They were just stamping them and go.
That's but the case. That's another history lesson, which I will now spend a few minutes talking about, because that's something that we dug up.
Yes.
There are there are a lot of different kinds of visas. There are tourist visas. There are visas for specific tasks, for instance, for various corporate activities. You come in, you want to be a doctor or something else, you get a visa that's not a tourist visa. And there's also the general categories of work visas, and there are organizational visas under the category of humanitarian aid. In 1967, remember that year?
Yes.
Israel defeated the Arab coalition, conquered the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And at that time, Jordan had a number, I think it was over 50 different visas that they gave to humanitarian organizations. From 1967 until now, The Israeli government has simply continued the policies that the Jordanians had. And I've had a few conversations with senior Israeli political officials, ministers. And back in 2016, 2017, there was an effort to change this, but nobody really thought it was that important. So it's still that way. So they get rubber. I gave you some background, but the basic answer is yes. They
Yes.
just rubber stamped the visas. And whatever these organizations did, no matter how bad it was, it didn't come up. And now that's changed. So there was no penalty for saying Israel's killing Palestinian babies, or in the case of the Norwegian Refugee Council that you mentioned, this guy Mortaja, for hiring somebody to take a drone. This was back, I think it was in 2021, go over the Gaza border with Israel and take drone pictures, right? That this is for humanitarian purposes, for giving. No, it was for looking at the Israeli military. And this guy was shot and killed, and he got a burial as a member of a terrorist organization. He got pictures with the leaders of Hamas. So then they got their visas rubber stamped.
What do you make of where were you, first of all, on October 7th, 6:30 in the morning?
I was asleep. It was Simchat Torah.
Yes.
And I don't think the sirens in Jerusalem went off to maybe 7:30, 7:45. And when you hear the sirens, I might have been awake already, and then you immediately go into your sheltered area. It wasn't clear what was going. We knew that rockets were being fired, and we heard either the rockets exploding or the
Iron Dome.
the Iron Dome going after them. And that's not something that we've experienced that before. And we knew there was some tension. Everybody knew there was some tension. So, okay, this is another round. It
And
took a while.
You're living up in the Tel Aviv area?
Jerusalem.
Where are you? You're in
Jerusalem. So there were sporadic sirens and sporadic shooting in Jerusalem. It took a while when we began to see outside on the street people driving around and a lot of noise and a lot of shouting, that we began to realize what was going on. Now, I didn't make it to shul that morning because I knew that I realized this was going on. My wife said, don't go to shul. I said, okay. And then we saw later on that people who did go to shul were told to go home. And that's when more and more information came out. And as the day went on and we got more information, we knew it took a couple of days to realize how terrible, how just inhuman and unimaginable that attack was. But I have to say, when I have this conversation, I have to immediately say that I never doubted that the Israeli people, society, the army would fight back and prevail. Yes, this was a terrible blow. It was something that the scale was not imaginable, even though there were some people who did know and write about this as a potential scene. But the confidence in the country and the people never wavered, and I think we're seeing that now.
And then now the United States is saying we need a change in government. Bibi has to go. We all know he's got to go. I guess the question is when, and he knows he has to go too. But people are saying the war continues so that Bibi continues to stay in office. You've heard that too, I guess.
A lot of people say a lot of, I was going to say stupid things, but I'll say unsupported
Right.
theories that they have, conspiracy theories. I heard Chuck Schumer, read what Chuck Schumer had to say today. He's a senator from New York, and he's invited to become an Israeli citizen and cast his vote. That's what we do here. Israeli politics is complicated, and I'm hesitating because I don't know how much detail to go into, and I don't want to give an academic lecture, so I'll be careful here. We've had 5 elections, I think, in the last X number of years. Things did change on October 7th, but you can't really tell where they're going politically. And most Israelis don't want to think about it now. We have a war to fight. We have a vicious enemy to defeat. We can't let them survive. And we have anti-Semitism everywhere. And we got to deal with that too. We as a collective Jewish people. And a lot of people are saying, let's put politics off to the side. Now, the longer that this goes on, the harder that's going to be. But let's wait a couple more months. The government, what I find most inexplainable is the focus on Netanyahu. Bibi's got to go. This is all his fault. Since October, 2 days or 3 days after October 7th, the government is being run by a broader coalition, by Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, two former chiefs of staff, and other politicians who've been brought in from the opposition. And in almost every way, they've been working extremely well together. Yeah, there's some bumps along the way, but they're minor. There was an issue that came up. Did Bibi try to somehow interfere with Gantz's meetings in Washington so that he wouldn't be photographed talking? What you hear from Gantz and from other people is he went and presented the Israeli policy that had to be done. And if they were listening to him, that's fine. And if they listen to Netanyahu, that's fine, or anybody else. So I think a lot of this focus on Netanyahu is old thinking, as the Chinese would say. But it's October 6th thinking. Yeah, you're right that Netanyahu, everybody leaves the stage at some point. It's Shimon Peres lasted for too long, and Netanyahu, many people will argue, should have left after 8 or 9 years. I think there's a good case to be made for that. But he still gets the support of about half the country. And in a democratic society, that changes in government have to take place democratically, not because an American senator from New York, for whatever reason, thinks, or the administration thinks that that's going to solve all the problems. It's not going to change policy, not at all.
And 92% of the Israeli public in the latest poll that I saw want this war to be completed.
Yes.
Finish it.
Yes, and the responses that we hear, you got to don't attack in Rafah, end the war before Ramadan, all of those things. The responses, whether it's from Netanyahu or Gantz or anybody else, get support very broadly. Israelis are not shy about demonstrating in the streets. And people are demonstrating on behalf of the hostages, even though that doesn't really make a difference, because Qatar doesn't care and Hamas doesn't care. But it's important for the families and for all the Israelis to identify, as it is for most American Jews. But there's no significant opposition to the current management, I would say, the government, in terms of all the policies. There are a lot of issues that come up because life goes on. One of the issues that comes up is the Haredi not serving in the population, not serving in the military. And there's a threat that if the law to bring them into the army passes, that they will leave the government, and that'll bring down Netanyahu's coalition. But I think that he will get support. The government, not he individually, but the current government will have enough support, even if the ultra-Orthodox parties, the Haredi parties, leave. And I think they know that. So this is also a significant change in Israeli politics. The old system of everybody scratches everybody else's back, and you end up with policies like this that just go on, which are so counterproductive. I think we're past that.
And you think the Haredi will begin to serve?
I think there'll be some sort of compromise, because you can't do it overnight. But yeah, you got to share the burden, and they have to recognize, and many of them do.
Yes.
How that's going to be done should hopefully be done cooperatively and not imposed, but it's going to be difficult. And
Israel doesn't have the manpower. They're extending the service of the reservists and bringing in older people too.
Members of my family who just turned 40 and were supposed to be finished and spent 4 months just now in the army and are called back in a couple of months because there's rotation. They can't leave. They got to stay till they're 41 and probably 42 and whatever. So that's the reality. Yeah, you got to spread the burden.
Israel has insisted that Hamas identify who they're holding, who's alive, whatnot. Hamas refuses. Do you know why?
Well, there are a couple of theories. I don't know why. And whatever happens with Hamas is always, except for the very top level of intelligence, and even there they may not know. One of the theories is they don't know. that they just have lost control. They brought all these people in, and they're scattered around with UNRWA teachers and wherever else is holding them.
Exactly.
And the whatever central government still exists doesn't have control if they still exist. So that's one theory. And another theory is that they don't want to give that information. There may be a lot of dead people, and then they lose the bargaining chip to get out all the terrorists out of Israeli jails. So there are a number of explanations, but that means that, and I think that there's complete support, almost complete support in the Israeli public for the Israeli government decision not to do anything in terms of meeting them halfway without that list.
Are you surprised about the anti-Semitism that sprang October 8th, right after one day, and that was it? Then we've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, I think that I can't say that there was anything that it was even possible to see the extent of the anti-Semitism getting out of control. Jew hatred, I like to use the term Jew hatred because that's what it is. It's vicious, it's violent, it's very, very threatening, but there are a couple of things that I see from where I sit, and I'm at a distance. One of the things is that this is not only about Jews and about Israel. This is what we've seen on university campuses. Is a lot of it is anti-Americanism, it's anti-Westernism, it's the Marxism, the Marxist, neo-Marxist, everything that we saw back 40, 50 years ago, but in a much smaller scale. Now it's much larger because the universities have become very intellectually corrupt. It's been taught, these are the people that get promoted, the faculty members. It's postmodernism, post-colonialism, all of that ideology, which has become dominant. And I'm an academic still, I see it, and I cringe because that wasn't when I went to universities. I didn't have that as part of my life, and it's much worse now. It's not even much worse. It's the other part is that a lot of the people who are leading this are people who have come to the United States. Some of them are just on student visas. MIT did not want to reveal who is leading the attacks because they said some of the students will lose their visas, or they maybe they're illegally. Well, it's okay to attack Jews, but it's not okay to talk about or to in any way take action against people who are leading it, particularly if they violated American law. There's an absurdity here. There's no values, there's no morality. And it's very disturbing. But also here, I'm somewhat optimistic. I have a lot of connection with students, with younger faculty, with others. The circle of people who are fighting back is much wider than it was for the last 20, 30 years. And every university campus that I see very, very strong. People are not afraid. Even at Harvard, the Harvard Crimson, you see people who are writing, you see faculty groups, is it CUNY or NYU, who are not afraid to say we're Zionists, we're Jewish, and we won't accept this intimidation. They're outnumbered. It's difficult, but they're doing the right thing. And I think that's a very positive indication of where this is going to end up when people come to their senses in the rest of the world.
Right. Well, this war goes on, and hopefully it will end soon. I appreciate your time. This has really been a fast half hour. My guest is Gerald Steinberg. He's a emeritus professor at Ilan University, but president of NGO Monitor, which checks and monitors and watches these non-governmental agencies that come into Israel supposedly to do good work, and sometimes it gets a bit distorted. And that's what you're there to monitor and to blow the whistle on. Thank you so much. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you. Enjoy it.
Thank you. This has
Bye-bye.
been Jewish Life. My name is Stewart Ain. Until next week, have a good one.